If I try to sell you this lens, chances are that you may buy it. It looks good, it mounts well, and it even clicks decently sharp photographs. But you wouldn't know what it's been through. This was a lens used in camera trapping, and as the assignment goes, it has endured months of rain, dust, dirt, dingy storage conditions, and rough transport. And it ultimately did give me photographs like this. So, if ever there were a lens which deserves a 21 gun salute, it's this one. That does not mean that you want to end up with it. And the tricky part? It's very difficult to read all that history of a lens just from one cursory meeting. Unless you know where to look and you know the questions that you need to ask, which is exactly what we're going to cover in today's episode. We're going to learn how to read a lens's past, and we're going to see the common issues that you may end up with if you buy a pre-owned lens. We'll see how those issues affect your image quality, and finally, how do you diagnose it so that you can use all that to take an informed decision on whether you want to buy the lens or you want to negotiate for fair price, or simply if you should walk away. On that note, let's begin. Firstly, when you're going to test a lens, we're not going to go empty-handed. We need to be prepared, and there are certain things that we must carry, and while you can skip the extras, but a few things are a must-have. Secondly, let's establish some pre-testing ground rules which we must do before we start out reading our lens's past. The first one is we're going to clean our lens properly front and back with a clean microfiber cloth. Second, you test the lens on your own camera body, because there are some tests where the camera body too plays an integral role, like in autofocus and compatibility. And third, and the most important one of all, if a lens is coming at a price that is too good to be true, then trust me, it is too good to be true. On that note, let's begin by reading the first past of our lens, which is accident history. Now, lenses are tougher than they look, and although they're made of glass, they can handle and survive some bumps without any impact on pictures. And yet, there may be some cases where they end up with some bruises or fractures. So let's look at the bruises first. It could be scuffs, paint rub, minor scratches on the barrel, the rubber grip becoming loose or stretched. The cosmetic bruises can be ugly, but they are not really harmful, so you don't have to worry about them. They will give you some indication of how careful the seller has been with his lens, but apart from that, there isn't a direct effect on the photographs. But fractures, on the other hand, are an entirely different story, so we have to be extra careful with them. So let's look at fracture number 1, which is damaged filter threads. And this is especially important if you shoot using filters in your line of work. So how do we diagnose it? Try screwing in a known good filter. It should fit and come off cleanly without any snags. Alternately, if you don't have a filter, you can run a fingertip around the threads and they should feel smooth and perfectly round. Now coming to fracture number 2, and that is decentering. Now sometimes a hard knock shifts the lens elements off center, sort of like a spine out of alignment. The lens still stands, but one edge or one side never quite feels right. This symptom is called decentering. What does it do to your images? One side or corner always stays soft even when you stop down. All lenses, to some extent or the other, have a little bit of decentering. The problem is when the decentering becomes obvious. So how do we diagnose it? You first mount your camera on a tripod. Make sure it is horizontal. Next, you pick a scene with a lot of detail. You can also use the sheets which look like this. You will find them in the description box below. Focus in the center and take 2 photographs. One wide open and the other at f8. Now open both the files and zoom in. Compare the far left versus the far right corners and edges. In the wide open shot, if there is a clearly softer side, It indicates decentering in the lens. Now look at the f8 shot. Everything should look sharper overall. But if the weak side is still quite soft, then the decentering is especially problematic. Also remember, if it's a zoom lens, run this test for the wide, mid and tele end of your focal length range because decentering can happen anywhere. And now coming to fracture number 3, which is bent bayonet. Now a bayonet is the metal ring that locks the lens to the body. Check the mount, it should be smooth, ensure that the lens screws in easily and ensure that there is absolutely no wobble. Now after doing these tests, you will get an insight as to whether your lens has suffered any physical trauma, any injuries that can affect the quality of your images. And the decision matrix? Now coming to pass number 2, which is unhealthy conditions. Now our lenses may be made out of glass, but they also have some organic trace elements. And to that, if you add time, if you add humidity, and if you add dark conditions, it becomes the perfect petri dish. And what grows there? Fungus. Now the good news, the fungus does not directly attack your glass. It feeds on the organic substances, which is why it can be professionally cleaned. But there is a bad news too. Sometimes the growth of fungus is so extensive that it can release some byproducts that will etch the coatings of the glass and in some cases can scar the glass also, and this is permanent damage. What it does to your image quality, depending on the position and degree of growth, it leads to lower contrast, softness, and sometimes uneven flare or ghosting. This is how fungus looks depending on the extent of its growth. So how do we diagnose it? You begin by setting your aperture to its widest. You can do that either by using the aperture ring or by using the lever at the rear and hold it open, or if neither is available, don't worry, most lenses sit wide open when they are off the camera. Now hold the lens with the rear element towards you and shine a flashlight across the elements at an angle first from the rear side and then from the opposite side. Now before we jump to the decision guide, let's again remember that fungus can be cleaned, but etching is permanent, and the problem is that you can never truly know if there is etching until you clean the glass, which is why we are going to be conservative in the decision box. Buy if the lens is clean or if there are only a few specks. Negotiate if you see light localized fungus, maybe a few filaments and some branching. Use that as leverage when you're negotiating, but send it straight to service for cleaning after purchase. And if you spot haze, webs or growth, especially near the rear group, walk away. That's where the damage hits the image quality the hardest and cleaning may not restore it. With that, we have reached the end of today's episode, which is part 1 on how to read a lens's past. I will see you in part 2 of this episode. Until then, take care. Bye.